A missing child, no clues. A desperate mother pleading for her daughter's return. But what if the person who was helping the investigation was the kidnapper? What if he had spent years constructing a soundproof underground prison, a hidden bunker meant to hold a victim indefinitely? This is the terrifying true story of Katie Beers, a little girl who vanished just one day before her 10th birthday, only to be found 17 days later in a place no one could have imagined. And when the truth came out, it exposed something even darker. Katie's kidnapping was not a random act of violence. It was part of a much deeper, more disturbing pattern of manipulation, betrayal, and abuse that no one could have anticipated. Some kidnappings happen in the dead of night, a shadowy figure lurking in an alley, snatching a child off the street. But Katie Beers' case was different. She wasn't taken by a stranger. She wasn't lured into a car by an unknown predator. She was taken by someone she had known and trusted for years. Her abductor wasn't an outsider. He was a family friend, a man who had been in her life since she was a toddler. Katie Beers was not your typical child. Life had never been easy for her. She was born into a broken family, growing up in a home filled with neglect and emotional abuse. Her mother, emotionally distant and often preoccupied, rarely paid attention to Katie's needs. And as Katie grew older, the neglect only deepened. Despite her yearning for love and attention, it was often denied. She was left alone, fending for herself in a cold, lonely environment. But then there was John Esposito, a man who had been around Katie's life for years. He was a family friend, someone who had known Katie since she was a toddler. In fact, he was even the godfather to Katie's half-brother. Esposito had long showered Katie with gifts, attention, and praise, things that Katie desperately craved but never received at home. At the time, no one thought anything of it. He seemed harmless. However, what no one realized, what no one saw beneath the surface, was that Esposito's kindness towards Katie was not as innocent as it seemed. For years, he had been grooming her, quietly feeding an obsession that would later lead to something far darker. It was the day before Katie Beers' 10th birthday, and like any child her age, she should have been celebrating. But instead, Katie was facing a harsh reality. The neglected child in a broken home had no reason to look forward to her birthday. But that day, something different happened. Esposito invited Katie over to his house. To her, it seemed like a treat. She had been there before. The house was familiar, and she had always felt safe there. But on that day, everything would change. John told Katie he had a special surprise for her, something that was just for her, something exciting. Katie, eager for any form of affection or attention, agreed. She trusted him, as she had always done. But what she didn't know was that John had been planning this moment for years. When Katie stepped inside the house, the door behind her locked. She didn't even have a chance to react before Esposito grabbed her, covering her mouth and dragging her through the house. She tried to scream, but her cries were muffled. The last thing she expected was for someone she trusted, someone she had known all her life, to betray her in such a horrifying way. Esposito led her to the garage, where a hidden hatch in the floor opened. Katie had no idea what was beneath that hatch, but it was the beginning of her nightmare. John Esposito had spent years building a secret underground chamber, a soundproof, concrete-lined room designed specifically for Katie. It was small, just 6 feet by 7 feet, but it would become her world for the next 17 days. The room had a makeshift toilet, a small TV, and a metal chain bolted to the floor. The walls were soundproof. No one could hear her screams. No one could hear her cry for help. Katie was trapped in a dark, suffocating space, completely isolated. There was no way out. The hatch above her head was locked shut, and she couldn't escape. She was alone. She was scared, and she didn't know if she would ever see the light of day again. Esposito's control over Katie was absolute. He rationed her food, limited her water, and even forced her to watch TV coverage of her disappearance. He told her that no one was looking for her, that no one cared. It was psychological torture, meant to break her spirit and make her believe that there was no hope. Within hours of Katie's disappearance, Esposito did something shocking. He called Katie's family and reported her missing. That's right, the kidnapper inserted himself into the investigation. But it didn't stop there. He went as far as telling the police that he was the last person to see Katie. He claimed that she had received a mysterious phone call and ran off with an unknown man. His performance was flawless. He was calm, convincing, and appeared to be genuinely worried. The media ran the story, and soon a massive search was launched. Flyers were handed out, police combed the streets, and the community rallied behind Katie's family in hopes of finding her. Meanwhile, John Esposito was standing in front of news cameras, acting devastated, pleading for Katie's safe return. All the while, he was keeping her trapped underground, controlled, and isolated from the world. For 17 days, Katie remained trapped, her fate unknown to the outside world. But Esposito's carefully constructed facade began to crack. He kept inserting himself into the investigation, showing up at the police station, volunteering information, and even offering emotional support. His constant presence raised red flags, and soon, investigators began to question his involvement. At first, there were no major suspicions. Esposito was cooperative and appeared desperate to help. But as the days wore on, certain details didn't add up. His timeline was inconsistent. He failed a lie detector test. And most important, his behavior was erratic, too eager, too helpful, too emotional. Something wasn't right. Detectives began to dig deeper. They noticed that Esposito's garage looked unfinished, like there was something he was hiding. It was a gut feeling, but they followed their instincts and obtained a search warrant. What they discovered shocked them. When the search team pried open the hidden hatch, they could hardly believe their eyes. There, in the small concrete room, was Katie Beers. She was weak, pale, and shaking. She had endured 17 days of captivity in a soundproof prison, alone, starving, and terrified. But she was alive. Officers quickly wrapped her in blankets and whispered words of comfort. After 17 days of horror, Katie was finally safe. Esposito was arrested on the spot, his lies exposed. He was a monster, a predator who had carefully planned the abduction of a child he had known and groomed for years. But even as Esposito's story fell apart, another darker revelation was waiting. At first, everyone thought John Esposito was the only monster in this story. But Katie revealed something even more horrifying. Her abuse didn't start with him. Long before Esposito took her, Katie had suffered years of physical and emotional abuse from her godmother, a woman who was supposed to protect her. Katie had never been safe. Her life had been filled with neglect, betrayal, and abuse from the very people who were supposed to care for her. In a twisted way, being kidnapped may have saved her life, as it finally forced her into a position where she was removed from her toxic environment. Once she was found, Katie's life slowly began to rebuild. She was placed in a loving foster home, far away from the people who had failed her. Unlike many kidnapping survivors, Katie refused to let her past define her. She went to college, became an advocate for missing children, and even wrote a book about her experience, Buried Memories, Katie Beers' Story. John Esposito, meanwhile, was sentenced to life in prison, where he could never hurt another child again. Katie's story is a testament to her resilience and strength. Despite everything she endured, she survived, rebuilt her life, and became a voice for others who couldn't speak out. Katie Beers' case proves that sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones you trust the most. But it also proves that resilience and strength can emerge from the darkest of situations. Despite everything, Katie didn't just survive, she thrived. But here's the real question. What if police hadn't searched Esposito's house when they did? How much longer would Katie have survived? And how many more kids will never escape? Katie's story is a chilling reminder that some monsters hide in plain sight, and that we must never let our guard down when it comes to the safety of our children. If this case shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe for deeper insights into real-life crime investigations. Because sometimes, the monsters aren't in the shadows. They're closer than you think.